All right, so let's talk about a couple of the outcomes of the trench warfare. When World War One began, they thought that the war would end quickly because of modern warfare and the ability to cause great losses on either side rather swiftly. However, bunkering down in trenches caused the war to extend itself almost indefinitely because neither side could really gain any ground and they had to settle into locations. What that meant is people had to be supplied with food and had to be supplied with munitions. And that's where the United States really comes in. Britain and France needs an ally who is able to produce an ample amount of goods and get those goods to the Allied forces. This ends up being a wonderful period in American history's production and supplying. They are producing all sorts of raw goods to be shipped across the Atlantic, and they are producing all sorts of ammunition, rockets, missiles to provide to those who are fighting in the trenches. So people in England and people in France are also having to ration their own supplies so that they can conserve food for those men who are fighting in the trenches. And so they start developing principles and policies of rationing and conservation, encouraging people to eat less bread, to use less sugar, to prevent the waste of food. And in doing so, this is not something that just the French are doing and the British are doing, but the Americans, as supporters of the Allies, are also participating in this. Why? Because in some time, the Germans are going to engage in a tactic of warfare that's called unrestricted submarine warfare. They start doing this in early 1917. But nonetheless, American ships that are shipping goods across the Atlantic are in danger of German U-boats. And so the more supplies that they can put in a ship and ship across to the Atlantic, and the more they can conserve their imports from being brought across the Atlantic, the less risk the American sailors have as being endangered by these German U-boats. Also, it divides the supplies equally among people and prevents uncertainty about like how much do we have enough resources? Are we producing enough resources for people in France, for England, for Americans to continue to thrive and survive? I think we can all kind of relate to this in our current situation in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so production is on the rise and is being created to meet the demand of the total warfare that is taking place. And let's talk for a second about this total warfare. Beginning from July to November in 1917, there is this heavy shelling that's taking place in Passchendaele. If you see over on the left of your screen, there is a picture of Passchendaele before this shelling, and then Passchendaele, the particular main crossroads after the shelling. This total warfare was meant to devastate the Germans, to freeze them from being able to make any movements, and to create a heavy amount of attrition. And the loss of life was actually fairly small in spite of the fact that there was all this devastation. So many of the people had evacuated and gotten out, or were bunkered down, that it didn't have as strong as effect as they would want, but it created a lot of attrition. So in early 1917, unrestricted submarine warfare happens. And the big marker for the entrance of the United States in World War I is the sinking of the Lusitania. When the Lusitania passenger ship is sunk, this causes Woodrow Wilson to say that you have awoken a sleepy giant. And the sleeping giant is the American forces. And so the American doughboys, young men, very clean cut, very well supplied, very well nourished, cross the Atlantic and enter into the fray on the 28th of May in 1917. And they are the turning point of World War I. They enter in and they give aid to the French resistance and French forces, and they coordinate a series of trench warfare attacks that are quite successful, and they end up taking the Verdun and some in the Ypres area and pushing back the forces of the Germans, as you can see, all the way back here at the end of 1917 and the end of 1918. What this does is this creates a serious despair for the Germans and a realization that they are not going to be victorious. And so on the 28th of June 1919, the Treaty of Versailles is signed and the war is officially over. With the end of World War I, we have a complete shift and change in the economic situation of all of these nations, in the geographic landscape of these nations. They are crippled. They financially and production wise, and their populations are devastated. Looking at these numbers of the population of World War I entering into the war, you have these kind of effects. In Austria and Hungary, 52 million people are there. 7.8 million men are mobilized for war, and at the end, 1.2 million people are dead. In Germany, 67 million population, 11 million are mobilized for war, and 1.8 million are dead. So you have 3 million dead just between those two key central powers. With France and with Britain and the overall British Empire, you have a significant loss of life as well. You can see that the United States, because they enter into the war late, their loss of life is significantly lower. But it's interesting to see that over the course of 4 years, France has mobilized 8.4 million. United States, in the only couple years that they're involved, has mobilized half that amount, and are clearly a key force in the resolution and the conclusion of the war. Between Russia's backing out of the war and the United States entering into the war, a lot of the forces were transferred to the Western Front as the Eastern Front just completely collapsed. And Russia had to deal with its own internal civil war, but nonetheless, the Germans were defeated. Uh, at the Treaty of Versailles and the ongoing discussions that took place between the main Allied leaders of the English and the French and the Americans, Wilson puts together his 14 points. And these 14 points are designed to create a League of Nations and a set of expectations of how to prevent the Germans from having the amount of power that they once had before. They are strictly limited in being able to produce military technology. They are limited in being able to have a access to the waters and to have a standing navy. The Maginot Line is created between France and Germany, which is a militarized, defensible line that says that the German forces and Germans just cannot cross it without permission, and it is always occupied by French forces. So here are some of the main points that you see. National armament to be reduced to the lowest point. Impartial adjustment of all colonial claims. And so the Germans have to give up a lot of their colonial claims. The evacuation from all Russian territory. Belgium must be evacuated and restored without any attempts to delimit the sovereignty which she enjoys in common with all free nations. All French territories should be freed, and major reparations were going to have to take place as well. A readjustment of the frontiers of Italy. The peoples of Austria-Hungary should be accorded the freest opportunity for autonomous development, because Germany had basically taken over and added Austria, Prussia, Hungary into its power and empire. The Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro should be evacuated. The Turkish portions of the present Ottoman Empire should be assured of secure sovereignty. An independent Polish state should be erected, which ends up becoming a major tension in World War II. The lands of the Polish are contested for, particularly by the Germans and the Russians, and the two of them are fighting for, the Soviets are fighting for those lands. A general association of all nations must be formed under specific covenants for the purpose of affording mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small states alike. And that's the prospectus of creating the League of Nations. Now, Woodrow Wilson's League of Nations does not come about because of the fact that Woodrow Wilson cannot convince his own constituency, the American government, its legislature, to endorse the League of Nations and to participate as one of the nations within the League. And so that effort falls apart, and it isn't until the United Nations is formed that any good as far as a general association of nations takes place. All right, so next time what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Russian Revolution, the Soviet Union, the rise of Hitler, all of the conditions that created that in the interwar period between World War I and World War II. Have a great rest of your day.